вторая, одна единица техники. 142, ответь.
Night over the Black Sea, and the horizon isn't a horizon anymore. It's a jagged, flickering wall of fire. Oil tanks groan, venting columns of smoke into a moonlit sky. In the distance, the buzz of propellers blends with sirens and panicked radio chatter. If you've been following this war, you know exactly what that soundtrack means. Drones. Lots of them. And this week, those drones reached deep, again, hitting Russia's port of Taman and an oil depot in the Penza region, while a rash, fast attack raid near Novopavlivka ended with 41 Russian soldiers down in barely 2 hours. Each strike is a headline. Together, they sketch a map of pressure points that Ukraine is now pressing with growing confidence. But first, the scene on the water. Taman sits on the Black Sea coast, at the village of Volna, just across the Kerch Strait from Crimea. On the night of January 21st to 22nd, drones slammed into the oil and gas terminal there, lighting 4 petroleum tanks and killing at least 2 and possibly 3 workers, with 8 more injured according to Russian officials. Multiple outlets carried the updates. Even with the fog of war, the picture is clear enough. This was another deep strike at fuel infrastructure tied to Moscow's war machine. Ukrainian security sources later told local media the operation was carried out by the SBU's Alpha Special Operations Unit. It was the second hit on Taman in less than a month, a pattern that matters more than any single fireball. Because in a war of attrition, fuel isn't just logistics, it's oxygen. Cut it, and every kilometre of the front line starts wheezing. 3 details make Taman different from a routine smoking tank farm story. First, geography. Volna's proximity to Crimea and the Kerch logistics corridor makes every flare stack there a signal to Russian supply officers. Anything flowing to the southern front is at risk. Second, the casualty discrepancy. 2 dead in early reports, then 3, tells you firefighting was chaotic and damage assessments kept moving, which is exactly what you'd expect when 4 tanks are burning. Third, this wasn't random. Ukrainian officials framed it as a deliberate campaign against fuel nodes sustaining Russian operations. Taman is not the biggest port in Russia, but it's a busy energy hub whose tanks and jetties feed both civilian markets and military logistics. When you can set that kind of complex ablaze twice in a month, you're not just sending a message, you're testing how long the other side can keep pretending those flames don't touch their frontline tempo. Now jump 600 plus kilometers northeast to Penza, far from any trench map on your newsfeed. Before dawn, the Penza Neftoprodukt depot caught fire after a drone attack, according to Ukrainian and Russian sources who agree on the blaze, if not on the cause. Kyiv's general staff called it a successful hit, aimed at shrinking the enemy's military-economic potential. Moscow's line, voiced by the regional governor, was that debris from a downed UAV fell on the site, no casualties. It's the usual duel of narratives, but even Russia's version concedes the more important fact. Another oil facility in the interior is on fire, and emergency crews are scrambling. When Ukraine can trigger a depot blaze this deep behind the lines, the question isn't whether a single tank farm survived. It's which shift supervisor, 800 kilometers away, just texted his wife that they might be sleeping at the plant tonight. Here's why Penza matters strategically. Targeting in the Russian rear forces a dispersion of air defenses, engineers, and firefighting assets that would otherwise sit closer to the front. It creates a risk premium on insurance, on rail movements, on turnaround times that can't be papered over by a press release. And it compounds the kind of winter strain Russia is already imposing on Ukraine with its own drone swarms. In mid-January, Moscow launched one of its largest combined drone and missile waves of the season, killing and wounding civilians, knocking out transformers, and plunging cities into rolling blackouts as temperatures dropped to minus double digits. Ukraine intercepted most of the drones, but most is not all, and a few hard hits on energy sites can darken entire districts. This is escalation by infrastructure, and both sides are playing. Let's move from burning tanks to burning rubber. Near Novopavlivka, Russian forces tried a 2-hour breakthrough under night and fog, rolling in small groups on quad bikes to exploit speed and surprise. It's a tactic we've seen before in this sector: low profile, high risk, and this time it ended badly. 41 Russian soldiers lost, according to Ukrainian battlefield reports corroborated by Ukrainian defense outlets. Independent analysts tracking the sector added that weather-driven assaults on these axes have often stalled into kill zones, where speed doesn't outpace surveillance and drones make clever routes into predictable ones. 2 hours is a long time in a modern fight, when every 100 meters is surveyed, networked, and pre-ranged. If you're thinking Mad Max meets artillery spreadsheet, you're not far off. War is innovation. Attrition is the reviewer who writes the honest feedback. That quad bike push is the flip side of the Taman Penza story. Russia is throwing bodies and machines into a meat grinder to gain ground around the Pokrovsk-Novopavlovka arc. Ukraine is throwing drones into Russia's depth to starve that grinder. Neither approach is new anymore. What's changing is how fast these tools are being refined. Off the shelf becomes battlefield ready in weeks. Subscribe and like for my quad bike raid tutorial. But the tactical logic is grim. If your opponent's line of rubberized, fast-moving assault teams keeps getting chewed up, you look for the fuel that feeds the next try, and you light it at the source. Meanwhile, outside the headline strikes, the war's background hum keeps surging. Russia's winter campaign of mass drones against Ukraine's grid continues to force rolling outages. Kyiv's response includes Energy Ramstein, a push to coordinate transformers, turbines, and repair crews, the same way it coordinates air defenses and artillery shells. That's not glamorous TV, but it's survival in a war where the grid is both target and weapon. On the military ledger, Ukraine's general staff continues reporting heavy daily attrition on Russian equipment, dozens of artillery systems, drones by the hundreds, and a steady drip of tanks and IFVs every 24 hours. Open source tallies and Western trackers warn these figures are claims rather than verified counts. But even the conservative numbers show a Russian armoured fleet increasingly padded with older models, welded cages, and improvisation. It's the strange symmetry of 2026. Both sides are innovating, and both sides are also raiding their grandfather's garages. In the past day alone, Ukrainian tallies listed 9 Russian tanks knocked out, alongside dozens of guns and vehicles. The cumulative numbers paint a picture of relentless wear on Moscow's kit. NATO, for its part, is trying to set a floor under Kyiv while avoiding escalation. At Davos, the alliance's new Secretary General hammered home the same refrain: invest more, deliver faster, keep Ukraine's sky breathing with air defenses. If that sounds like the 2024 to 2025 playlist on repeat, that's because the fundamentals haven't changed, except that Russia's drone and missile output did, and Europe's catch-up is still chasing that curve. The NATO Parliamentary Assembly followed with an open call to accelerate delivery of air defense and air-to-air missiles. Translation: your Patriot, Iris-T and AMRAAM might be the difference between a substation offline for a day and a city dark for a week. And along the Baltic, the radar screens never sleep. Swedish quick-reaction fighters lifted to shadow a Tu-22M bomber escorted by Su-35s moving near NATO airspace. No drama, just professional intercepts. But every one of these scrambles is a postcard from the edge. A reminder that while drones burn oil tanks in Krasnodar Krai, the broader chessboard stays crowded. Sweden didn't join NATO to collect membership pins. It joined to add jets, hulls, and missiles to a coalition that's trying to keep this fire contained. Back to Taman. Why does a port fire ripple all the way to the trenches west of Donetsk? Because fuel is the hidden river that keeps a modern army afloat. A battalion tactical group burns through thousands of litres a day just to exist, idling, repositioning, feeding heaters and generators. A sustained campaign of deep strikes on depots and terminals spikes the cost and complexity of every Russian move. You reroute tankers, you thicken air defenses in your rear, you slow or stagger convoys, which means units wait, which means assaults reschedule, which means the 2-hour breakthrough becomes a maybe next week once the trucks get through. In attrition warfare, that delay is often the real kill shot. Penza, in that same logic, is proof of range. The more Ukraine shows it can hit nodes far from the border, the more Russia must treat its depth as contested. Penza is not a frontline city, and yet it's now in the same sentence as fire, oil depot, drones. Even if the blaze was sparked by debris from a downed UAV, you still end up with burned fuel and a governor doing dawn damage control on Telegram. Remember the strategic math. Defense in depth is expensive. Every firefighter and panzer guarding a tank farm in the interior is a firefighter and panzer not guarding a bridge, a pontoon crossing, or a brigade assembly area closer to the fight. And yes, the budget matters. War eats rubles, and every extra ruble is one the home front will eventually notice. Let's talk the human angle for a moment. The 3 workers reported killed at Volna, or 2 depending on when you checked the ticker, weren't soldiers. They were civilians on a night shift. For Ukraine, striking oil infrastructure is a means to slow an invasion. For Russia, those sites often blur into the civilian sphere. This is the ethical knot of deep strikes: legitimate military supply versus civilian risk. It's not new and not tidy, but it's front and center as drones become the poor man's cruise missile, and as both sides learn, in real time, where their lawyers and logisticians can agree to disagree. Meanwhile, inside Ukraine, normal now includes sirens at 3 a.m., the thump of air defense, and a morning commute past shattered transformer yards. In the latest mass Russian attack, 2 people were killed, dozens injured, and energy sites across multiple regions took hits. That's the flip side of Kyiv's drone reach. Russia can also reach, and it's been doing so with grim regularity. Every time you see a clip of Ukrainian firefighters hosing a burning substation, remember, those same crews will be asked to keep the lights on while shoveling snow off the lines. Winter is not neutral here, it's a co-author. What about the front line? Beyond one failed quad bike raid, the big picture hasn't flipped. Russia is still pressing along multiple axes, trying to wear down Ukrainian brigades through constant assaults, artillery pressure, and glide bomb terror. Analysts at ISW and Critical Threats continue to flag limited Russian advances and persistent attempts to probe Ukrainian defenses in the Donetsk sector, with no decisive breakthrough. In that environment, 41 men lost in 2 hours matters not just as a statistic, it's a microcosm of an operational approach that trades people for meters, and often gets neither. There's also the Crimea piece. Ukrainian forces say they destroyed a Russian radar installation on the peninsula in this same wave of strikes, part of a long campaign to blind, harass, and unnerve the network that shields the Black Sea approaches and supplies the southern front. Combine that with drones arcing into Krasnodar Krai and the landing lights that briefly turned night into day at Volna, and you get the larger thesis here. Ukraine is trying to make the entire southern logistics belt feel unsafe every night. If you're a Russian quartermaster, unsafe nights translate into delayed days. Let's tally the strategic signals embedded in this week's flashes. 1. Ukraine's drone industrial base is clearly not just surviving, it's scaling. Hitting Penza and Taman within hours of each other suggests depth of stock and breadth of launch options. 2. Russian air defense saturation has limits. The fact that debris hit the Penza depot, by Russia's telling, still means a threat was overhead and a critical site took damage. 3. NATO is steadying, not sprinting. Davos remarks reaffirmed support and pressed Europe to invest, but the alliance is also clearly trying to manage risk while keeping Ukraine's grid alive and its fighters supplied. That posture, resolute yet restrained, defines the Western track right now. 4. On the ground, the attrition grinds on. Reports of 9 Russian tanks destroyed in a day won't decide the war, but they will decide whether a brigade can mount that next push or has to wait for a replenishment train that's stuck behind a burning tank farm. We should add a caveat the size of a Patriot battery. Many of these numbers, daily losses, destroyed systems, casualty counts, come from belligerents. They're signals, not gospel. That's why we lean on converging sources. Russian regional governors posting emergency updates, Ukrainian general staff communiques, and third-party reporting that confirms at least the where, the when, and the "yep, that's definitely on fire." This week, those signals point to the same conclusion. Ukraine is increasingly comfortable striking what makes the Russian war run, and Russia is increasingly committed to striking what keeps Ukraine warm and working. It's national power versus national power, routed through substations and storage tanks. If you're wondering where NATO's line is in all this, it sits in familiar places. Patriot sites scanning the sky, ISR aircraft mapping launch trajectories, partner capitals counting interceptors and transformers like they're gold coins. The NATO Parliamentary Assembly's call to accelerate deliveries and the Secretary-General's Davos drumbeat on investments weren't just rhetoric, they were a public readout of private math. Ukraine bleeds power when Russia surges drones. It breathes when Patriot and Iris-T do their job. It grows claws when its own drones lift towards Volna and Penza. The alliance is trying to ensure the breathing and the clawing continue without tumbling into direct war. It's a tightrope with frost on it. So where does that leave the battlefield after a week of headlines? With fuel tanks burning on the Black Sea coast and in the Volga heartland, with quad bikes abandoned in blackened fields west of Donetsk, with European leaders in Davos warned, again, that later is not a strategy, and with Ukrainian grid operators planning an energy Ramstein because transformers are now as strategic as tanks, with Swedish fighters reminding Russian bombers that the Baltic isn't a playground, with artillery totals creeping higher and tank counts inching lower, 1 9-vehicle day at a time. Each piece is small. Together, they form the silhouette of a long war, learning, adapting, and hardening. Somewhere, a Russian staff officer is drafting a stern memo about unauthorized quad bike tactics. Somewhere, a Ukrainian drone operator is adding pyrotechnician to a resume that already lists barista and FPV kamikaze whisperer. Because even in a story told through smoke plumes and infrared, people are still people. That's why a number like 41 soldiers lost hits harder than any heat signature. It's not a data point, it's the sound of a plan meeting a reality that didn't blink. The strikes in Penza and at Taman aren't silver bullets. They won't end the war next week, but they're part of a coherent logic. Throttle the fuel, thicken the fog around every Russian logistics decision, and make every attempted breakthrough pay so dearly that a 2-hour raid ends with a line in a ledger, not a line on a map. On the other side, Moscow will keep trying to freeze Ukraine into submission, bending transformers and human patience past their limits. Between those strategies lies the space where NATO's decisions, Europe's energy math, and Ukraine's drone factories will decide how 2026 feels, hot and dark, or noisy and survivable. As the flames at Volna flicker out and the Penza depot mops up, somebody in a basement in Kiev is already loading another drone, and somebody in Krasnodar Krai is reposting a new no-fly notice on Telegram. The war has entered its long-range phase, where every tank farm and radar dome is both target and message. So here's the question I'll leave you with. When the battlefield can now reach past the front line, to the ports and the power plants, what counts as rear anymore? And how long can a war that burns both ends of the candle pretend it's not lighting the room where the negotiations will eventually happen?